She thought she could humiliate him on live television. But his response, it changed everything. The email arrived late in the afternoon, concise, professional, and straight to the point. The producers of Wake Up America, one of the country's top-rated morning shows, were inviting Jordan Hayes, CEO and founder of Apex Dynamics, to appear on an upcoming segment about innovation in the energy sector. Jordan had seen this game before, a major network feigning interest in independent entrepreneurs, giving them a fleeting moment in the spotlight before moving on to the next viral sensation. But this time, something felt different. Apex wasn't just another scrappy startup. They had just secured a billion-dollar deal with the Department of Energy, outmaneuvering corporate giants who had dominated the industry for decades. This wasn't luck, it was to decades of relentless determination paying off. But as Jordan stepped onto the live set, he had no idea that this interview was about to take an unexpected turn. Still, something about the invitation didn't sit right with him. His chief of staff, Maya, noticed his hesitation. "You sure about this? You know how these shows work. They love a success story, but they love tearing one down even more." Jordan leaned back in his chair. "I'll handle it. Besides, it's national exposure. Let's see what they have to say." Maya let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "Just don't let them bait you." He nodded, though deep down, he knew exactly how this game was played. If this interview was a setup, they were playing chess with the wrong man. The morning of the interview, Jordan arrived at WNN Studios in New York City. The green room was crisp, sterile, the kind of place where emotions had no business existing. A young producer appeared in the doorway, barely looking up from her clipboard. "Mr. Hayes, thanks for being here. We'll mic you up in 5. No small talk, no warm welcome, just another transaction." As he sat in the makeup chair, an assistant dusted powder across his face with mechanical efficiency. Across the room, a flat-screen monitor played the live broadcast, a segment on a Hollywood divorce scandal, followed by a fluff piece on summer grilling tips. Then, a transition card. Coming up next, the clean energy boom genius or government handout. Jordan's jaw tightened, so that was their angle. If they thought they had the upper hand, they were in for a surprise. What he didn't realize was just how far they were willing to go. The set of Wake Up America was staged to feel warm and inviting, soft blues and golds, a sleek glass coffee table between the host's chair and the guests. Overhead cameras hung like silent sentinels, capturing every micro-expression. Jordan adjusted his suit jacket as he took his seat across from Madeline Royce, the show's lead anchor, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for cutting through corporate spin. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jordan Hayes," she began, her voice smooth, measured. "CEO of Apex Dynamics, a true American success story." Jordan gave a polite nod. "Appreciate you having me." Madeline leaned in slightly, flipping through her cue cards. "Now, let's get right into it. Your company recently secured a $1.2 billion contract with the Department of Energy, edging out some of the biggest names in the industry." "That's impressive." Jordan had seen this playbook before. Build him up first, make it seem like they respected his achievements. He kept his response measured. "It was a competitive process, but yeah, we put in the work. We developed a high-efficiency battery technology that outperformed our competitors. Simple as that." Madeline crossed her legs, her expression neutral. "Some have called it a game changer." A slight pause. "But others have raised concerns." Jordan didn't blink. "Concerns?" She picked up a card, glancing down before reading aloud. "Some industry experts suggest that Apex Dynamics may have benefited from federal clean energy grants designed to boost minority-led businesses. That companies like yours are being given an advantage not purely because of innovation, but because the government is prioritizing diversity. That maybe this wasn't just about being the best, but about checking a box." And there it was, the real reason he was here. Jordan let the moment stretch before responding. "I've heard that argument before. It's funny, though, when a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when a legacy corporation, run by the same families for generations, lands those same deals. Nobody questions it. The energy in the studio shifted. Off camera, producers exchanged glances. Madeline held her ground. So you're saying race played no role at all in your success? Jordan let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Let me ask you this: when Tesla won billions in government contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos secured federal funding for his space ventures, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? Madeline's expression remained unreadable. So you don't believe these diversity programs help? Jordan folded his hands. They help level the playing field. But what people don't realize is the playing field was never level to begin with. But Madeline wasn't finished. She had something else up her sleeve. Her smile sharpened, like a blade wrapped in silk. She glanced at her cue cards, then back up at Jordan. Well, Jordan, let's talk about that playing field you mentioned, she said, her tone shifting from polite curiosity to something cooler. You grew up in Detroit, Michigan, single mother, public school. Worked your way up from nothing. That's inspiring. Jordan gave a slow nod, already seeing where this was headed. Madeline continued, but here's what some might wonder: how does someone with no Ivy League background, no deep family connections, go from a struggling neighborhood to securing government contracts that billion-dollar corporations failed to land? She let the question sit there. The implication was clear. How did you get here? Did someone pull strings? Jordan tilted his head slightly, as if considering his response. It's called work, Madeline. Some of us don't have generational wealth or country club networks to fall back on. So we build from the ground up. Madeline nodded slightly, like she was acknowledging his words, but she wasn't really listening. But surely you had help along the way, she pressed. Maybe a mentor, a program? Something that gave you an extra push. Jordan exhaled quietly. Yeah, help came in the form of working 3 jobs while earning my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first battery prototype because I couldn't afford rent. That's the help I got. Her lips pressed together, just for a second. Behind the cameras, the producers were locked in now. Madeline shuffled her cue cards again. And yet, some would argue that Black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives exist specifically to open doors that weren't open decades ago. Jordan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. You know what's funny, Jordan said, a hint of amusement in his voice. When a Black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us. But nobody asks which old money bank funded a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Harvard, or which golf buddy invested in their company. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. The truth is, success isn't handed out in some lottery. People like me had to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table, a subtle but undeniable shift in the room. The quiet tension of an audience realizing they were witnessing something real unfold. But Madeline didn't blink. Instead, she smiled the way a chess player smiles when they think they've just trapped their opponent. That's an interesting perspective, she said, her voice smooth as glass. But let's address another factor: perception. She turned slightly, as if inviting the cameras to lean in closer. Jordan, you present yourself as a self-made success. But let's talk about how your story is perceived by the public. Some argue that Black entrepreneurs receive an unfair advantage when it comes to media attention, that the narrative of overcoming struggle is more marketable than the thousands of white business owners who work just as hard but don't get the same headlines. Jordan let out a quiet chuckle. Oh, so now we get too much attention. Madeline kept her polished smile, but a subtle shift in her posture gave her away. She hadn't expected him to laugh. You're telling me that in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where major VC funding still overwhelmingly goes to white-owned startups, the real issue is that people like me get too much press? Madeline tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'm just pointing out that in today's climate, Some people feel there's pressure to highlight diversity over pure merit. Jordan exhaled, shaking his head. Merit, right? He glanced briefly at the cameras, then back at her. Let me ask you something, Madeline. Do you really think that if I wasn't exceptional at what I do, I'd be sitting in this chair right now? Her lips parted slightly, but before she could respond, he kept going. You think I got here because I played the diversity card? Or do you think I got here despite everything designed to keep me out? The silence in the room was louder than any of her previous questions, but Madeline wasn't done, not yet, because she had one last card to play, the one designed to break him. She took a slow breath, shifting in her seat just enough to make it look casual. But Jordan saw a crack in the facade. She glanced at her cue cards again, then set them down. This next part she wanted to deliver directly. Jordan, she said, tilting her head slightly, I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this. And I respect that, but let me ask you something. Jordan gave a slight nod, waiting. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated? She paused, letting the words settle. After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. The audacity. Jordan could feel the heat creeping up his spine. But he didn't let it show. Instead, he let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. You know, Jordan said, his voice measured, it's funny how people love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. Madeline's smile stayed in place, but something in her eyes flickered. Jordan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Let me put it this way, if one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see, the fire wasn't that bad? Madeline opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it. But Jordan wasn't done. The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I had to fight twice as hard to get through it. He let his words settle. Even the studio crew had stopped moving. Madeline adjusted in her seat, reaching for a controlled response. I understand your perspective, but let's talk about another side of this. She turned slightly toward the cameras, her voice slipping into that carefully neutral tone used for damage control. Some might say your frustration isn't really about race, she continued, that it's about resentment toward larger corporations. After all, you've publicly criticized big tech companies for not hiring more diverse executives. Jordan tilted his head. Resentment? No. Accountability? Absolutely. Madeline pressed her lips together for a beat. Then what do you say to those who believe that in today's economy, success is based on hard work, not race? Jordan exhaled through his nose. Then he locked eyes with her. This was it, the moment. I say, he began, that people love to believe in fairy tales when they're the ones benefiting from them. A ripple of silence washed over the set, the kind of silence that sticks. But let's be real, he continued, his voice steady. Black entrepreneurs still get denied loans at twice the rate of white business owners. We still receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. And even when we prove ourselves, we still get asked whether we deserved our success. Madeline sat still, listening, but not necessarily hearing. So let's stop pretending the system isn't rigged, Jordan said, his voice calm, but unyielding. It is, and the only people who don't see it are the ones it works for. Silence, pure, heavy silence. The producers didn't cut to commercial. The control room didn't intervene. This was raw. Madeline shifted slightly, her posture a little less composed. She opened her mouth, but Jordan wasn't finished. Because this was the moment that would send shockwaves across the country. Madeline cleared her throat, casting a brief glance toward the off-camera producers, but there was no rescue coming. She had walked into this, and now she had to sit in it. Jordan adjusted his watch, letting the silence linger. Just long enough to make people squirm. Then, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling. You know what the real problem is, he said, his voice quieter now but somehow heavier. Madeline hesitated. What? Jordan didn't blink. The bar isn't in the same place for everyone. Madeline shifted slightly, meaning, I mean, Jordan said, a mediocre white man can fail upwards in this country. But a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to get a shot. Somewhere off camera, a producer muttered a curse. They knew this was going viral. Jordan didn't stop. A white CEO can run a company into the ground, bankrupt it, lay off thousands of employees, and somehow he'll get hired somewhere else. Meanwhile, a black CEO has one bad quarter, and suddenly, it's proof that we weren't ready for leadership. Madeline opened her mouth to respond. But he wasn't done, and the best part, Jordan let out a dry chuckle. When we actually make it, people like you sit across from us and ask if we got here because of some special advantage. Silence. Madeline's jaw tightened. Subtle, but the camera caught it. Jordan leaned forward, not aggressive. Just firm, just final. You wanted to talk about fairness? He let out a soft, bitter chuckle. Then let's start by telling the truth. Another silence, but this one was different. It wasn't discomfort anymore. It was impact. Madeline's expression had shifted. It wasn't just the audience watching Jordan now. It was the entire country. And then the moment, Jordan turned slightly, looking straight into the camera. I know what some of you are thinking right now, he said. Some of you are nodding because you've seen this, lived this. He let his gaze hold. And some of you are sitting there, frowning, arms crossed, telling yourself this isn't real. That I'm just playing victim, that it's all in my head. His lips pressed together for a second before he finished. But deep down you know I'm right. The studio was silent, no one breathed. And then, all right, we need to take a quick break. The producer's voice crackled over the speakers. Madeline forced a polite smile. We'll be back with more after this. The cameras cut, but the damage was done. Within an hour, clips of the exchange were everywhere. But the real storm was only beginning. The clip hit social media like a wrecking ball. By the time Jordan was in his car, his phone was blowing up texts, missed calls, notifications flooding his screen. Twitter was on fire. Jordan Hayes just exposed the media's bias on live TV. This was powerful. #truth hurts. The way he looked into the camera and called out America. Chills. Jordan Hayes was right. But not everyone saw it that way. Here we go again. Another successful guy pretending to be oppressed. Crimea River. Stop the victim mindset. Wow, this guy just proved why people don't like hiring activists. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Merit matters. Cable news picked it up within the hour. Some called him brave, others called him angry and combative. By lunchtime, Wake Up America released a carefully worded statement. We value open dialogue and diverse perspectives. While today's discussion became more intense than expected, we stand by our commitment to fair conversations. Jordan laughed when he read it. Fair, right? His chief of staff, Maya, called him, her voice half laughing, half exasperated. Do you realize you just set the internet on fire? Jordan rubbed his temple. Wasn't exactly my plan. Well, congrats. You just became the most talked about entrepreneur in America. He didn't respond because he knew what came next. Because viral moments don't stay just moments. They become battlegrounds. And the next 48 hours were about to get messy. But this wasn't just about him anymore. By the next morning, the story had exploded beyond social media. Cable news anchors debated it live on television. Opinion pieces flooded every major publication. Everyone had an angle. Fox News, is Jordan Hayes the new face of corporate entitlement? CNN, Jordan Hayes' viral moment a reckoning for America's meritocracy. Business Insider, what Jordan Hayes' interview reveals about race and success in America. Meanwhile, Madeline Royce was in damage control mode. On her show the next morning, she gave a carefully rehearsed response. I respect Mr. Hayes and his accomplishments, but I stand by my questions. My job as a journalist is to ask what the audience is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were. Translation, she wasn't backing down. Jordan watched from his office, shaking his head. Maya sat across from him, scrolling through emails. You know, she said, we just got a flood of new investor inquiries. People want to work with us. Jordan smirked. Let me guess, the same people who ignored us last year. Maya shrugged. Guess being controversial is good for business. But it wasn't all positive. Some clients pulled out. A major corporate partner suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitments. And then came the death threats, emails, phone calls. Even an unmarked package left outside Apex Dynamics headquarters. Nothing inside. Just a single sheet of paper. One word written in bold, ENOUGH. Maya frowned as she read the message, you need security. Jordan let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He knew this would come. Anytime a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically. This is the cost, but backing down was never an option. And now he had a decision to make. Would he let the backlash silence him, or was this just the beginning of something bigger? Jordan sat in his office, staring at the New York City skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind. Praise, backlash, threats, opportunities. He thought about his younger self, the kid from Detroit who had to fight for every inch of success. The one who watched doors shut in his face while others walked through without knocking. And now here he was, at the center of a national debate he never asked for, but one he couldn't ignore. Maya entered, her expression unreadable. We just got an offer. Jordan raised an eyebrow. From who? She set a folder on his desk, a network. They want you to do a televised special, a one-on-one deep dive about race, business, and the system. Jordan exhaled. So now they want to listen. Maya smirked. Seems like it. Then, after a beat, what do you want to do? He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He could walk away, let the noise die down. Get back to business, or he could use this moment. Not for clout, not for attention, but to say the things nobody wanted to hear. Jordan picked up the folder, flipping through the proposal. Then he set it down. He looked at Maya. Tell them I'll do it. Her eyes widened slightly. You sure? He nodded. Yeah, but on my terms. Because if the system was going to put him under a spotlight, he was damn sure going to control the narrative. Jordan Hayes' viral moment wasn't just another internet controversy. It was a reckoning. It forced a conversation people had been dodging for decades. About race, about success, about who gets to rise without question. And who gets questioned when they rise. Some called him an activist. Some called him arrogant. Some called him right. But one thing was certain. Nobody could ignore him anymore. So what do you think? Does success mean playing by the rules of a broken system? Or does it mean rewriting the rules entirely? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, subscribe.